Shattered Pieces by Orpheus Kidwell, Chapter 19. It looks as if everyone is gathered, so let us begin. Yami spoke calmly as he looked around the war room. Valiant forces have continued to gather outside of our walls, but have yet to begin their attack. Hidan, how does the skirmish going? The blonde directed his attention to where Naruto's acolyte sat with a sadistic grin. Everything is going well, Lord Uzumaki, Hidan mentioned. The men and women of the Holy Church of the Healer have taken up arms in our crusade, just as you ordered. Any time a small group is separated from the group for any reason, we take them out. Traps have been set up outside the walls and have claimed the lives of dozens of men, while making dozens more unable to walk again, let alone fight. The nobles are finding it more difficult to rally their troops every day. Yami nodded and turned his attention to Sasori this time. And what of your Project Sasori? Have Conqueror and you managed to make much progress? The red-haired man nodded his head and seemed to gather his thoughts before speaking. Our 6 bullheads have been joined by a force of 2 streamers and 3 nightwings thus far. All that remains is repairing what we can of the Heron, and then we'll have restored what we can. After that, we'll have to do quite a bit more work before any additional aircraft will be added to our arsenal. Yami thought over this for a time. Finish up the Heron as quickly as you can, and then both of you will aid Tazuna in the defensive fortifications. Speaking of which, how are the emplacements going? I know that the wall was complete before our Declaration of Independence was set, but what else has been done, Tazuna? The man drank from his ever-present bottle of whiskey before responding. Those artillery of yours helped me from having to do anything in terms of bombarding, so I moved right past that. As I'm sure you noticed when you moved through the wall to place them, there are several towers up, and as of now, I'm putting all of my efforts into further fortifying the walls against anything they might decide to throw at them. That dust mine of yours is really helping in powering all of my equipment. I'm really glad that you got that up and running. Of course, Tasuna, it was only natural that we use everything at our disposal. The less we need to rely on outside sources, the better it is for all of us. Sakan, what about the Guardians? Have any of you seen anything that needs to be brought forth? Sakan shook his head. Fortunately, there seems to be little change in the formation of troops. Each of the noble court seems to have taken their own troops and gathered in different places around our walls instead of converging in a single area. It seems that everyone is going to try and take the city individually, vying for their own glory and prestige. If our assumption is correct, there are many soldiers and we are vastly outnumbered, but I do not doubt our ability to win so long as they remain so divided. We are ready to man the artillery at your command. Yami looked around at the war council one last time before his purple eyes bled a deep cerulean, and Naruto took control once more. Back in control, he let a smile form on his lips as he looked at his loyal council and knew they represented his loyal followers, his family. We will not be defeated by such a disorganized, disjointed, and disinfined force. If they will not lead an assault, we will take first blood. And as Naruto spoke, a light blue and reflexive rectangular surface formed in the center of the room. Everyone watched Taku stepped out of it, bowing her head to their leader. Lord Naruto, I have come with news. One of the nobles is leading his forces for an assault on the walls on the southeastern gate. There is also a team of huntsmen who claim to have been sent by Headmaster Ospen that are requesting entrance. They are located in the north and have somehow managed to elude sight of not only Vale's armies, but also Hidan's fellowship. What are your orders? Naruto thought a moment about the information before resolving himself. Sakan, I want you to leave the rest of the Guardians, the vacuum mercenaries, and Gurren in defensive efforts on the wall. Don't meet them out in the field if you can help it. Whatever range attacks you can use, trim down their forces as much as you can. If you can possibly take out the noble leading them, do so. Hidan, I want your church and Tyrion to distract the others to ensure that they don't reinforce the approaching army. Haku, locate Cinder, Roman, Mercury, and Emerald, and let them know I need them at the southeastern battle, but do not allow them to find out about the team of huntsmen. I will deal with them directly. Sabasa, Neo, and Kirimamaru will go with me. Everyone else continue as you were before the meeting. We will not allow these nobles without any war experience to defeat us here or anywhere. Of course, Lord Uzumaki. Southeastern Gate. Toya looked over her section of the wall with a devious smirk. Those idiots thought they could assault her gate, did they? I think it's time to show Vale why I'm one of the Guardians. Pulling her silver flute from its place on her belt, Tayuya blew into its mouthpiece and moved her fingers. The tune was slow, it was drab, it caused the very atmosphere itself to darken in a very literal sense, as what were once white clouds darkened considerably because a moon sun over oncoming forces. Some of the troops seemed to slow until the leader amongst them yelled something which caused the group to move as one once more. Tayuya continued playing her tune though as the air began to vibrate. Her tempo picked up pace, and the volume of her music became louder. Even as she played, an ethereal form of an ogre materialized to her side with a large wooden cello, dragging its bow across the strings fluidly. The beast played with the deftness that its large size implied it should not be able to. A second ogre formed to her other side, who bore a viola, adding its music to the atmosphere. On the side of those two, a pair of more ogres appeared, each one with a violin in hand. The quintet played, and the storm worsened, localized entirely over the approaching army. Suddenly, the cello began to speed up its dark tune until the ogre violently drew his bow against the side which each drew. A bolt of lightning struck the ground, sending whoever it struck flying. The viola and violins kept the same pace with each other, and the wind seemed to pick up in time to their actions. It became so violent that the weaker men amongst the group would lose their balance and fall. When they attempted to rise, it would only end in their falling once more. As Hiya played her flute, leading her ensemble in their musical assault, the wind managed to drop her cap to the wall. Two horns could be seen protruding from where the cap once lay. Both appear to have been cut due to the fact that they were wide at the base and then flattened at only a meager 4 inches off her scalp. Looking down at her opponents as if they were the mad doctor who had done that to her, she played a particular high note that transitioned her into a new piece of music. That's when the grapefruit-sized hail began to fall. Northern wall. A group of huntsmen that Haku spoke of was gathered outside the northern wall just as he relayed. The figure that seemed to be the leader had brown hair stayed in tall spikes, swept back, and a pair of teal eyes. His skin was a pale ivory while his face was chiseled and well defined. This matched the rest of his muscular body. He wore a dark blue vest over his body, presumably made of some sort of protective material, and had a long sleeve covering his right arm, while his left was completely bare. He also wore a pair of similarly colored pants with a few pouches strapped to them. He didn't seem to be carrying any weapons aside from a pair of particularly heavy gauntlets on his fists. Next to him stood a rather round man. His face was very pudgy, and his entire body was defensively well fed. Over his head, he wore a red bandana that wore a symbol of two rocks balancing on a scale. His black hair came out from under the red cloth, swept back onto his shoulders. This man's black eyes seemed to be filled with that sort of stereotypical jovial attitude one expected from rotund men. Hanging from his belt was what appeared to be a rather large headed mace. On the leader's other side was a younger man with blonde hair in a high ponytail, with his bangs covering his right eye and the other eye deep blue. He wore a teal robe around his body with white edging that hid whatever he had underneath it, including whether or not he had any weapons at all. Lastly, behind the leader was a girl with black hair, pink eyes, and who appeared to be the same age as the blonde. She wore a similar outfit to the leader, except it was a red sleeve and a brown vest. Strapped across her back in an X formation were a pair of guando. The quartet turned their attention to the wall as it opened up, revealing another quartet. Naruto led them, with Neo, Zabuza, and Kimimaru following behind him. "Welcome to Mount Glen. I am Lord Naruto Uzumaki, leader and protector of this place." As he spoke, the whole closed up behind him as if it had never been there. "The headmaster Ospen has sent a team of his huntsmen here, has he? I do hope he has only good intentions." The leader regarded the boy a moment before nodding. "I am Gare Bakuhatsu, leader of Team Bard. Joined by me are my cousin Deidra Bakukatsu, and other two are siblings and grandchildren of Vacuum Chief of the Ryotubing tribe, Korotsuchi and Akusuchi Ryotabin. Her headmaster Ospen gave us a mission to deliver something to your village. However, I have to ask, what is going on? It seems like there are several large parties assaulting this place based on aura signatures. Not to mention, I thought this place was abandoned a long time ago. My people and I have cleared out the Grim here, resettled the area, and rebuilt Mount Glen from the ground up. This was all done without the without the patrols of Vale ever noticing a thing, despite the fact we were also aiding the nearby settlements in survival, protecting them from the very grim the Valian nobles were responsible for. The parties you send are the King of Vale and his nobles attempting to subjugate us to his authority. Despite the fact that we are surviving just fine on our own, I am unsure why he sent you here, as I am sure that he knew what was going on, but you may complete your mission if you so choose. If you hinder us, however, Naruto's eyes turned red momentarily before receding back to their normal color. I will not hesitate to use whatever force is necessary to keep my family protected. Gary looked at the Teen a moment before eyeing his card. Something seemed to spark in his teal orbs upon making eye contact with Zabuza before he nodded and turned to his team. After a few moments of discussion, he turned back to Naruto. Not only will we not hinder you, I think we'd like to offer our services to you if the headmaster sent us here with the knowledge of this. I'm sure there was a reason, and if you manage to get the demon of the bloody mist on your side, I'm sure that you've got something going for you. Isn't that right, old friend? Subsa gave Gary a look that made it obvious he was grinning beneath his bandages. End of chapter 19. Shattered Pieces by Orpheus Kidwell, chapter 20. Took you faggots long enough, don't you think? Tayuya scolded her fellow guardians. Despite her strong start against the encroaching force, her performance had rapidly degenerated since her aura dropped far faster the more Oni she summoned, pushing for a quintet right off the bat when she had already been managing her station. The last 18 hours probably wasn't the wisest course of action. A lady shouldn't speak so coarsely, Tayuya. Jirobo chastised the redhead. She glared at him, but didn't say anything. Looking over the wall, the teen frowned. There were some injured and dead, but the force still seemed to be going strong thanks to the general keeping their morale high. Kitamaru, what do you think? The multi-armed guardian looked over the field before smirking. Something of that difficulty is far too easy for me. You got to give me a harder level. Jirobu, he mentioned as he pulled the bow off of his back, infusing his saliva with aura. He spat out a glob of some golden silky substance. Two of his hands molded it into what looked like an arrow as a third one sprinkled some sort of dust onto its head, while a fourth sprinkled another type on its rear end. The front sparkled a dangerous-looking orange, while the back shone a distinct silver. Notching the arrow into his bow, two hands held the bow while the other three pulled back the string. Game over, player two. This round belongs to Mount Glen. Upon release, the back end shone a bright and nearly translucent shade of silver as the wind pushed it to speeds that broke the sound barrier. The noble didn't see it coming, and the surrounding men didn't expect the sudden and very large explosion that came with the impact of the arrow into their leader's chest. The noble, his horse, and a dozen armored retainers were subject to the blast radius and either incinerated or dismembered within a moment. The peasants who were lucky enough not to be hit by the blowback of the explosion quickly ran away from the field of battle. Those who were still on the ground got to their feet if they could and followed their fellow countrymen. Those who couldn't, cowards, the lot of them, Gurren scoffed as any injured and dead still lying on the field were soon coated in crystal. Before the coffin she made imploded and turned former enemies into a latter prophet after their remains were coated. I'm not sure why Lord Naruto sent all of us to this wall. He wanted us to back up to Yuya primarily and to spread out along the walls as a better defense. Sakon pointed out, having deduced the leader's intentions. Get some rest, Yuya. You need it more than we do. If anything comes up that we need you for, we'll wake you. The redhead nodded and grabbed her cap, placing it back on her head before going back into her tower, which doubled as a temporary room for her to rest in if needed. Jirobu, Kidimaru, go back to your post. Gurren, you stay here and take over for Tayuya. I'll head back to my wall. With the church harassing the armies, we should have time before another assault. Cinder, Emerald, Mercury, and Roman, go to each of the towers aside from my own. Sorcery should be at Kidimaru's station already. Baki, I'd like you to come with me. Sakon spoke to a man who appeared to be in his 30s with a veil covering a half of his face vertically, who nodded. This was the leader of the Vacuan mercenaries. I assume it is so that we can coordinate everything accordingly. Sakon nodded, which incited Baki to speak into a headset he was wearing. Spread out along the wall. Keep your weapons locked, loaded, and ready for any other assaults. Let me know if you see anything at all. He nodded back at Sakon, who began walking along the wall, back to his own station as the other did as well. Cinder stayed with Gurren, while Mercury went with Jirobu, Emerald went with Kidimaru, and Roman went to meet up with Sasori in the final tower. Now it was all a matter of time, though. Now it was a matter of what Lord Naruto wished for them to do. King Alexander's tent. Outside of Mount Glen, past the northwestern wall, King Alexander the Sixth of Bastion looked over his maps and couldn't help but mutter to himself. What he said was incoherent, but the fact that he was muttering was clear enough. The King of Ill was a lithe man with short curled brown hair and a pair of grey eyes. Atop his head sat a black cap instead of the crown jewels of Ill. Hanging from his waist was a saber with an ornate basket hilt and a revolver on the other side of his belt with a silver gleam to it. My liege, I bring news from the southeastern wall. Another man, and this one wearing plate armor over his entire body, aside from his head. The helmet was tucked under his arm, knelt before King Alexander. Aaron led his men in a charge on the wall and was killed, along with the majority of those following him, with the rest fleeing. The pretenders within seemed to have mounted their first defense. Alexander looked to the man who spoke and nodded. "Thank you, Argent," he replied, looking over the map in his stand of the area around Mount Glen. He took one of the chess pieces, each one representing a different noble who had answered his call to arms, off of the board. Despite how much Alexander might have tried to seem calm on the outside, it was very obvious he was swearing profusely from hearing the first that had been on their side. Nervously, he scanned the map. How did it happen? There was a woman on the wall who played a flute, who then bent the weather to her will. Later, she was joined by a man with many arms who fired the largest bow I'd ever seen at him. The arrow must have been coated in dust, for it exploded as soon as it hit him, my brother, killing his entire retinue. Anyone left was coated with this strange purple material and then shattered, leaving nothing behind. The few peasant survivors ran to the woods, but those lunatics who have been picking us off might have gotten to them at this point. Do they have huntsmen inside the walls? Alexander asked with a clear look of fear in his eyes. If Osman had sided with the rebels, he knew he couldn't fight huntsmen with these forces. Arjun paused before shaking his head. If anything, I'd say that they're former White Fang. All of the people who used the semblance were Faunus. Otherwise, it'd be pretty coincidental of three separate Faunus huntsmen together in one place. On top of that, I didn't recognize any of them, and I have made it a point to memorize the faces of anyone who comes out of the academies, just in case anyone tries to make an attempt on the life of my liege. Argento was still kneeling all through the conversation, and the conviction in his voice gave Alexander a little comfort. Perhaps they could turn this around. And if they've only got three people with semblances, then we just need to attack from four sides. I'll have Jasper, Onyx, Beryl, and Amber launch a simultaneous charge from the north, south, east, and west. King Alexander nodded to himself, content in his plan. Unfortunately for him, neither Argent nor himself seemed to notice something moving in the full body mirror he kept at the back of the tent. Northern wall. Naruto looked at Gardy as he stated he'd like to help the war effort. Before he could speak, a violet swam into and dominated his eyes. "I'm afraid we will have to decline, Gary. There are many reasons that I cannot allow that to happen. The foremost being that no matter how powerful your lord may be, you would be committing treason against the crown of your king. As it stands, you can complete your mission without negative consequences, and it should remain that way. I understand what the headmaster was attempting to do here, but Mount Glen can handle this." Gary seemed disappointed at Naruto's words, but nodded. "I understand and appreciate your worry for us." Gary replied, though both his team and himself were surprised as an icy veil appeared before the blonde he spoke to, materializing into a rectangular shape before someone stepped out of it. It was difficult to tell much about them, considering they wore a teal harry and a hakama and a full face, wide mask with a large red swirl in its face. The masked figure knelt before Naruto and spoke in a very formal and respectful tone. "Lord Naruto, I have uncovered the King of Veil's next strategy." Naruto nodded, motioning for his spy master to continue. "He is under the assumption that Taiya, Gurren, and Kinemara are our only troops with semblances, and is going to instruct four of the nobles to charge our northern, southern, eastern, and western walls. I am unsure when he will time this, but it will be simultaneously." "Then thank you, Haku. I will prepare our forces accordingly." The masked individual nodded before going back into the mirror. Naruto looked at Team Bard as his eyes reverted back to blue. The nobles will be charging this wall pretty soon. Remember what I said? You may complete your mission, but if you hinder us, I will treat you like an enemy. I sincerely hope you are able to get back to Beacon without that happening. Do send my regards to the headmaster, though. His message is appreciated and understood. Gary seemed to be going through a few different emotions all at the same time, but sighed. Right, I guess we're just going to have to go back to Vel then. Naruto nodded and turned, walking back through the wall as it opened for him. The trio of guards he had followed him through it, and it was only after it closed that Kurotsuchi talked. So, you know you never gave him the package, right? She asked Gary, who looked over at Deidara to see it in his cousin's hands. We didn't even complete our mission. Kurotsuchi sighed as she saw the look in her leader's eyes. My big mouth. Let me guess, you're going to use this as an excuse to stay, right? I mean, he said he would let us complete our mission, didn't he? Gary pointed out. Later, hand that over to Akatsuchi. I trust him to keep it safe more than you. Besides, we're gonna need some explosives very soon. Later grinned and handed it over to Kurotsuchi's brother. Let's hide in the trees for a bit while you get prepared. Apparently some people are going to be showing up rather soon. Four groups charging 4 walls and there's 4 of us, right? I think we can complete 4 missions here. Kurotsuchi rolled her eyes while Akatsuchi just nodded. Later, you can stay here. I'll take the wets. Akatsuchi gets the east, and you can have the south, Kuro. It's because I can fly, isn't it? Gary just smiled and looked at her. Why do I always have to say something? Fine, but you owe me after this. End of chapter 20.